Even in his own estimation, Marcus Henry Clemens was born lucky. His 600-acre lake is surrounded by his 1,000-acre estate at Loch Rinn in County Leitrim. He thinks of himself as an Irishman, pure and simple, but to those outside the Anglo-Irish tradition, he is descended from the landlord Earls of Leitrim, who, less than a century ago, controlled 100,000 acres of Irish land and God knows how many tenant families. Seven miles of leafy avenues cover the Loch Rinn estate, avenues now beginning to reflect the economic hopelessness and bog apathy of Leitrim. In 1878, a collateral ancestor of Marcus Clemens, William Sidney, 3rd Earl of Leitrim, lived in the family mansion. On April 2nd of that year, he was murdered by 3 of his tenants on the shores of Mulroy Bay in County Donegal. Popular tradition remembers the wicked Earl as a tyrannical landlord, ruthless in dealing with tenants, even more ruthless in his handling of their daughters. But the family, and indeed modern research, see him as a partially crippled Puritan, a stern Victorian, totally devoted to a tradition of disinterested service to land and tenants alike.
How I came here? A gift. An old cousin, well, older generation, very generously made it over to me, present. In 1962, 8 years ago. The original house you see here, and on the right, to the right of the ivy skirting up the wall there.
Up to about here?
Yes, okay. Going back that way. Compact, modest house for a squire, I suppose, you know. When my grandfather inherited it from Sir Lord Leitrim, he built on all this sort of big, high, impressive stuff, which is attempt to make it grander, more impressive, great big front door here. Come and have a look. Go in. See the date, 1889 was the date of completion over the door.
That was the latest
Salve, you know, which is...
Fine door, hefty door.
Good door. Good high doorway too, you see. And this pretty sort of 1890, rather sentimental stained glass, low quality. Come on in. Entrance hall.
What was down here? Seems to have stopped.
That's the non-existent staircase. Didn't happen. They ran out of money, or, you know, they had so much set aside to build the additions to the house. And perhaps the rents weren't paid, or there was a land act or something.
So it never went up?
Never went up. Rather pity in a way.
Commons Journals.
Commons Journals, that's a working man's library, politician's working library.
Because so many Clements were in the Commons?
Well, we had a member of the family, I think, in the House of Commons, Irish or British, from about 1720 up to after the famine, and
well, then later in the
somebody in the House of Lords.
The Leitrim's.
Yes, the extent of the Leitrim title.
A lot of geographical stuff here. How's that?
My great-uncle, somebody called Sir Clements Markham, who was president of the Geographical Society, Victorian times, an explorer himself. And finally, he sent Scott to his death at the South Pole as an old man. He organized the Scott expedition. Well, this is my grandfather's final addition to the house. The idea being, I think, the creation of a baronial hall, medieval sort of idea, or perhaps an English Elizabethan manor house. This style, of course, is rather late compared to most Anglo-Irish houses. I think it's successful, I think it's good of its kind, and I think that is something good in itself.
What does owning a house like this mean to you?
It's not a sense of possession, I think. I think one feels, or one certainly should feel, less a feeling of actual ownership, mine, all mine, and more that one is a trustee, a life trustee, that one's ancestors, and one hopes one's successors, put their contribution into improvement according to their own times, and that one is simply part of a continuing system, a continuing tradition, which changes, should try and keep up with the times, and should be alive.
Well, do you think that the Anglo-Irish as a class have integrated in any successful way with the post-revolution community in Ireland. In other words, since 16.
It's very hard to be empirical in this way and to say, as a class, I think many members have. I think it's probably true to say that many members have not integrated. Many perhaps do not want to integrate. It's more difficult always for the older generation, who are more set in their ways, to adapt to changing circumstances. And we've had, when you talk of the Anglo-Irish landowning class, they have suffered three major changes, I think, over the last century. First is the cessation of their profession, their occupation. Their land has been removed from them effectively, although you may say, I have 1,000 acres here now. This was simply the nucleus of a very much larger holding, and the 1,000 acres was never really a business proposition. It was an outsized garden, perhaps. The second thing is the great social changes that I think the sort of dramatic date was the 4th of August, am I right, 1914, when the whole of this sort of sunny Edwardian era came to an end. The Victorian Edwardian upper and upper middle class prosperity. It seems to me, always looking back, reading old diaries or reading biographies of this time, the sun never stopped shining. Tennis parties, gentle movement to visit neighbors behind a horse, a well-groomed horse.
The lodges on the estate are sturdy and elegant, as are all the Lough Rinne buildings. So well they might be. The Earls of Leitrim could afford to build well. In their Victorian heyday, the annual income from their properties was hardly less in today's figures than £200,000. Even in the childhood of Marcus Clements, Lough Rinne employed a fair number of domestic and farm staff. In earlier years, these yards were a busy community, almost a complete village. But less than a year ago, Marcus Clements ceased all attempts to farm Lough Rinne. Today, on this estate of 1,000 acres, his potatoes come in plastic bags from the local shop, his milk in bottles. Today, this great estate employs less than half a dozen people. 64 years ago, Robert Reid started working in the carpenter's shop at 4 shillings a week. Today, he has from the estate a pension of 2 and 6pence a week. 4 generations of his family have served the Clements family. He still remembers the golden days at the turn of the century.
Well, there was a cook, a kitchen maid, and a scullery maid in that department. There was 2 parlour maids, and there was a pantry boy.
Yeah, and how many more?
And there was 2 housemaids, and a nursery maid, and a nurse, and a governess, and a lady's maid. And there was 2 in the laundry maid, and there was 2 in the dairy maids.
And you remember back to Victorian times, or very near them.
Yeah.
Used to be a lot of parties and dances up in the castle then.
Well, not a terrible lot, but there used to be occasional ones. There weren't too numerous, like.
Would you have been in at any of those?
No, I could look in through the window at them all right, but that was all.
What did you see through the window then?
The ladies dancing with their big Victorian dresses on them and ball dresses.
And who would they have been?
Well, I can't specify any names.
But they'd have come from a long way around, I suppose.
Well, they were all gentry was invited for the night.
Well, this is the new one.
Guests in the castle today are few in numbers, although they might well still be gentry. But Marcus Clements' house guests are vastly outnumbered by those who camp and caravan on his pleasure grounds. They are hardly in the tradition, but they do bring in a few bob and help to keep the thistles down. No longer do herds of black, white-headed heifers graze the rushy fields. The hammering of tent pegs has replaced the gentle click of croquet mallets on the lawn.
I'd love to have a hard court, actually, because I'm very, very bad, you know. I was sort of rather anti the white shorts kind of tennis. As a child, I used to go in big boots with hobnails. Not good at near it.
Marcus Clemens has adapted a rent economy to a tent economy. His English wife Joanne, daughter of a naval officer, does her bit to keep the pot boiling by running a smart boutique in Dublin's Grafton Street.
Stop sending us, don't you? Because
Oh, he will. This is the end of the line. I rang him the other day. And
Her partner is Agnes Leslie, wife of the owner of Glaslock Estate in neighbouring County Monaghan. They find it more profitable to dress the dolly girls of Dublin than to languish by their remote and lonely northern lakes.
I was trying to get him to let us have some for the opening, you see, but he sort of held on to them because I think they were his only models at the time.
The battlemented gardens of Lochrin terrace down to the water, a bastion of decaying Anglo-Irish elegance, the only great house in the county of Leitrim. A charming place, but as a place to live today.
it's very beautiful, I agree. And it's a lovely place to live in summer, but in winter, and it's winter 3/4 of the year, it's very lonely. And, of course, the family have never lived here before all the year round. They had a house in London, and they had a house in Kildare, and they just moved around. It was never meant to be a sole home.
And now that you're living in Dublin part of the time, do you feel you've the best of both worlds?
Well, obviously, because I'm a city-bred girl and an outsider to a certain extent. And, well, the people who have the same interests as myself tend to live in Dublin.
As a city-bred girl, what did you find when you married and came here 8 or 9 years ago?
Oh, well, a very sort of late 19th century way of life. It centered mainly around shooting parties. This was the social life. A man's world. And it was very funny because you used to be invited to shoots rather reluctantly because they preferred not to have women there. And one could follow one's husband like a squaw, sort of 2 paces behind, holding the dog. Never the gun, but the dog. And then there were very sort of masculine parties afterwards. And, well, it was funny, but not forever. An Irish country house without horses would be as unthinkable as a gallery without pictures. Besides, the campers and the caravanners enjoy the ponies at 10 bob an hour. And so did the Clements children, Selina and Fiona, Nathaniel and Hal, and of course 12-year-old Charles, who might well be the next master of Lochrin if primogeniture prevails and circumstances permit.
Nat's hat. No. He won't trot very easily. Come on. Come on, smart, clear. Walk up smart. Now, come here, you. Now, hold him firm. Now, look, don't, just come round here a minute. Come on, come up here. Come up here. Come up here. Now, stand up, Captain. Now, look, it's far more comfy if you go up and down, up and down, up and down. And you're swinging from the ball of your knee here, you see, from here. You're gripping there, and you're rising up and down. That's it, yeah. And you've got your stirrup then to take your weight. Now, you go up as he gives you the one up, and you come down and meet the next one. Okay? Right, move on. Come on, we're gonna trot down here. Ready? Now, grip it easy, sit up, sit up, comfy, come on. Try and get the rise, that's it. Hello, come on, come on, come on. Now, I'm gonna let you go, and on you go around, come on. Come on, Captain, come on. Oh!
Hard work, or is it?
Teaching them to be good horse prodigies is very important.
Well, I suppose it's part of the Anglo-Irish tradition.
Not really.
Well, tell me, is Charles your eldest?
He's my eldest, yeah, that one.
Does that mean he necessarily inherits this place?
Not necessarily, no. If he suits it temperamentally, if he wants to do it partly.
In other words,
If the place still
primogeniture
exists.
still...
It's not an immutable law. It's a general rule, I think, when in doubt.
Well, presumably
And
you'll pick the boy, whichever boy, if I understand you rightly, on the basis of which one seems most suited to take the place over, provided there still is a place
sure,
whenever you depart.
Yes. One never knows what the nature of a place like this might become in the future.
It could be a hotel, though.
It might be a hotel, it might be this tourist thing of caravans might go on. It might revert maybe to some form of more intensive
I think they're okay.
agriculture.
Well, let's say it continues. How would you propose, thanks, how would you propose to educate Charles in order to inherit and run such a place?
Well,
For instance, I know you went to Eton, and I think you said to me once that you would like Charles to go there. Well, in the 1970s in Ireland, is that the most useful thing in his interest for you to do?
well, one of the considerations is Ireland in the 1970s. The other might be Eton in the 1970s. Probably the Eton now is not the Eton that I knew in the 1940s and 50s.
Do you intend to give each one of them a profession? Because it's quite possible in 20 or 30 years' time that things socially here could have changed even more rapidly than they have since independence, and that this way of life might be obliterated.
I think if they make the running, certainly, yes. But you've always got to allow for the fact they may not make the running.
But there isn't a tradition in your family of being lawyers and doctors and so on. Essentially, you are landowning people.
Landowning, the profession was the army or the church.
Well, these were
This is
younger
going
son
back
professions.
for younger son professions.
But
yeah,
nowadays,
yeah.
this really isn't practical.
Well, nowadays
anymore.
you have to think of younger son professions for all, maybe, because social revolution, social change may knock out any idea of inherited wealth.
The Dublin Horse Show is still a great social event, the traditional junket of the Anglo-Irish, an annual reinvigoration of the relics of old decency. The stewards at the Dublin Show are almost as well bred as the horses. Marcus Clemens does his daily stint at Ballsbridge in the veterinary paddock.
I may appear to be rather British. I perhaps use rather British language. My mother tongue is English. I don't, unfortunately, I rather regret this, I think I don't speak Irish. Us.
Us.
The bad word, us. I would like to, as an academic study, because it is part of the tradition of the majority of the people. On the other hand, I think there's a great tendency in modern Ireland to create the idea of a sort of Celtic or Gaelic Hirenfolk, a sort of master race of Gaels. I don't think this was ever true. I think there was, if one studies history, there was a Gaelic military aristocracy who came in and imposed their way, relatively small in numbers, imposed their way on the mass of the indigenous previous population, forced them or allowed them to take Gaelic Celtic names, which means that these people are now no longer identifiable. I think that racially many Irish people are very, very far from being Gaelic or Celtic. The Anglo-Irish, the later planters, were also a military aristocracy, small numbers, but there was a strong enough ethnic and religious difference which has been maintained. In fact, if I trace my family tree right back, I don't find any Gaelic names, O's or Macs.
The O's and the Macs have gone from Leitrim in their tens of thousands, yet a dinner party at Loughrinn is still an expression of Anglo-Irish comfort and hospitality. Thomas Pakenham of Tullynally Castle, writer and son of the Earl of Longford. Major Pierce Sinnott of Furness in County Kildare, Knight of Malta and Companion of the Bath. Dermot O'Hara of Annamore, descended from the one-time Catholic and Gaelic O'Haras, chieftains of Sligo. Mark Leslie of Glaslock, grandson of Sir Shane Leslie.
To answer, the first question about meanings, definitions, my uncle, the last Lord Longford, he was extremely upset if anyone called him Anglo-Irish. He thought it was offensive. He didn't...
After dinner, wives fade into the drawing room, and over the port, the talk turns, as so often it must, to the image men like these present to Ireland today.
The barriers are the good old ordinary boring class barriers, which includes an element of, I think, jealousy to some extent. Envy. Envy is a better word, yeah. Because they have certain assumptions they think of a group.
But you're very often the wrong one.
Sitting back, sitting
the wrong one.
They have this extraordinary image, which is probably untrue. One is certain.
Of the young
I mean, it's very hard for me, myself, to learn what anybody outside my social little pond thinks about me or people like me.
I think they think we spend a lot of time doing what we're doing now, drinking port, which in fact isn't true. I mean, my wife and I live very ordinary lives like everybody else. And I get up at 7 o'clock and milk the cows and milk them in the evening again and make silage during the day. This may not apply to everybody here, but that's certainly my life. There's no very great different from anybody else involved in farming.
But look, Dermot, come off it. We're all being too defensive about it. There is something odd and anachronistic about all our lives here. In one way or another, we all live in white elephants. We all live in queer, old, crumbling Georgian houses, which shouldn't still exist because they're complete anachronisms.
Yes, of course they are.
Totally uncomfortable.
In large house out of choice.
Well, exactly. We're all cuckoo in one way or another.
Yes,
we're all sentimental about what our great-grandfathers put up, and we dare knock them down. That shows we're not hard men of business, as once the Anglo-Irish were. We're hopelessly weak, soft characters. But I think the new trend is to say we're on the right side because we're keeping these things, which some of them have more artistic value than others, but we're keeping them going. We're even preserving them so the public can see them.
There's a tremendous social interest in the way other people live. 40 years ago, I went to Petworth House, Sussex, and the people were looking into the dining room. They said, "Her Ladyship has winkles for dinner, just like we do." And I remember 30 years ago again, at another great castle, they looked under the bed to see, do they use chamber pots still? It's a very human interest, which we all find in all sorts of ways in which people live.
Look, let's be fair. Tourism is obviously the fastest growing industry in Ireland, and the Anglo-Irish, if they exist, are going to cash in on this probably as much as anyone, because they've got the equipment, they've got these rushing acres, they've got the towers and turrets, the battlements, all of which look very good, both on the outside of a tourist brochure and, in fact, very interesting inside. I think they're going to do fine. They're going to let their gatehouses, if they're near enough Dublin or the big cities, they're going to let those ruined old lodges are going to be done up for weekenders. They're going to have campsites like Marcus on their rushy ponds. They're going to dig out their ponds with tourist board grub, which we're going to do next week. And the whole thing is going to present a new spanking picture of progress.
But is it enough that the sunshine of Bord Fáilte grants should break through the green and dappled avenues of the old estates? The vegetation that closes inexorably on Lough Rinn, as on so much of Leitrim, is an image of the stranglehold exerted by a social tradition which is all but totally irrelevant, and a reflection of the economic absurdity of attempting practical agriculture on impractical acres. Once upon a time, to be a landlord in Ireland meant to gather and administer rents. It never meant to be a large-scale farmer. Today, there are no rents to collect. If now the Land Commission should acquire Lough Rinn, as is quite possible, can its land support 50-acre farms? Could the 50-acre farmers support themselves? Or will the estate become a plantation of Sitka spruce and Norway pine? There is every likelihood that now is the moment of divorce between Marcus Clemens and Lough Rinn, unless he finds some new way to keep alive a tradition that has combined exploitation and elegance, penury and privilege, shame in the past, and something of sadness today.
I might start an industry. I might go into business or commerce. I already have. It's a relatively small thing. The tourist thing started here. It doesn't go on all the year. It only goes on really for about 6 weeks in the summer. But it's a start. It's something.
Are you being a little bit hopeful in imagining that you will find a small industry in the farmyard?
Maybe nobody but me would be stupid enough to do it. I don't know. I like living here. I like living in that. It's a nice house to live in. I like the view from the windows.